Good morning, everyone.
Good
Good
morning.
morning, Rabbi.
We are learning Mishnah Yisukah, Perek Gimel, Chapter 3, Mishnah Vav, Mishnah 6. The Mishnah is continuing discussing the esrog. Also, chazazis al rubai. If a chazazis formed on most of the esrog, what's a chazazis? And they explain it as a deformity that looks like a cluster of small blisters. A cluster, it's a deformity that looks like a cluster of small blisters. But it's a cluster, it's one thing. Okay. And that developed al rubai on most of the esrog. So whatever this exactly chazas looks like, call it a big spot because some kind of extra growth that's on it. Like they say, it looks like a cluster, it's a deformity. So we say that if it's on the majority of the esrog, the Mishnah is going to say the esrog is invalid. That is talking about if this chazazis, if this deformity is in one spot. If it's in one spot, if it's all together, then if it covers the majority of the esrog is invalid. But let's say it's not in one place, it's in two or three spots. So then even if it's not covering the majority of the esrog, it invalidates the esrog. Because at that point, when it has it in many different places, when it has different places, it takes away again from the beauty of the esrog. The Bartanura adds that let's say you have this chazazis, a very small one, but it's on the pitim. The pitim being the piece that protrudes on top, right? Right. It's called the pitim. Okay, maybe we call that too the pitim. Okay, if it appears on that, then the halacha is that it would, even one small one would go ahead and validate it. All right, so that's the first part. Also, chazazis al rubai, the chazazis developed on the majority of it, nitla pitmasai, or the pitim was removed. This protrusion at the top of the esrog. Again, it's hard to see the picture exactly, but if you've got, just imagine an esrog that you had a couple of months ago, the pitim being that that protrusion on top. If it was removed, the Mishnah is going to say again, it's invalid. When we say that an esrog whose pitim was removed is invalid, that's talking about that it grew with an esrog. There are some esrogs that grow with a pitim, there's some that don't grow with a pitim. If it never grew with a pitim, it's not a problem. It's only if it had a pitim and then the pitim broke off, then it's going to be invalid. That's the second case.
Broke them off completely or just hanging?
I don't think it makes a difference. I don't think hanging is good. Now, niklaf. If let's say niklaf, the skin was peeled off. What does that mean? So it does not mean that the hard shell of the esrog was peeled off. Because when that hard shell is peeled off, and you can see the white skin inside, then that's called the esrog is missing a part of it. And because it's missing, it would be invalid. That's not the case. It seems, and again, it's not something that we would probably see on our esrogim, but it seems that there is an outer membrane over the whole esrog. And that outer, that what happens? I'm assuming that outer membrane at some point in time, kind of. Well, I don't know. It says we're talking about the outer membrane was removed. The yellow skin of the esrog remains intact. Right? There's nothing wrong with the esrog. The esrog's outside layer, the yellow layer, the green layer, whatever it is, the outside layer, it's intact. But there's some kind of a membrane that's there that was removed. That is going to invalidate the esrog. Why? Because without the protective membrane, it will soon dry or rot. Such an esrog is already considered not to possess beauty. So if but the Mishnah says that it was niklaf, which means it was completely peeled off. But if some of the membrane remains, the esrog is valid because it will heal. It will regenerate. And therefore, the esrog is going to stay good. So only if you peel off this outer membrane completely, that is when it invalidates the lulav. But then they add here, if even part of the thick layer of skin was removed and the inner white flesh of the esrog shows, the esrog is invalid because it is deficient. So being peeled here, again, doesn't mean peeling the actual peel, what we call the peel of the esrog. Because if that's peeled off, and it says you can see the white flesh of the esrog, it's chaser, it's deficient. But what we're talking about is this outer membrane. Now, nistak. Nistak means it was split. So what does it mean it was split? That is, I'm reading from the notes, the thick skin of the esrog is split all the way down on one side. There's a split in the esrog, okay? And it goes down the whole side. Even though no part of the esrog is actually missing, right? It could be split and not be missing. It is invalid because it's considered deficient. Just the mere fact that it's split down on one side. Okay, so that means, again, the thick skin of the esrog is split all the way down on one side. It becomes invalid. The last case is nikiv b'chaser kol shehu. If, let's say, it has a hole and the slightest amount of the esrog is missing, puzzle, then the esrog is puzzle. That word puzzle goes on all the examples we did until now. All these cases are all invalid. The last case of nikiv b'chaser kol shehu is that, again, it's got a hole in it, and the hole, it actually causes even the slightest amount of the esrog to be missing, then it's considered deficient, and it's going to be puzzle. Now, the Mishna refers to a hole that does not go all the way through the esrog. When we talk about a hole and there's something missing, that's talking about that there's a hole. The hole does not go all the way through the esrog. It doesn't go through the whole esrog, and there's some amount of it missing, even a tiny amount, it's invalid. If it does go through all the way, if it goes all the way through, it would disqualify the esrog even if no part of the esrog is missing. For example, it was pierced with a needle. So that's calling out a hole that's not necessarily missing anything, but it goes all the way through from one side to the other. It's going to validate it. Okay, next. Now let's say this is going to be like this is the opposite of what we had before. Let's say this chazazis, this deformity, developed on, again, in one place, and it doesn't cover the majority of the esrog. It's on the minority of the esrog. Or nital uktzai, or the stem was removed. Now, what's the stem? The stem is what we would call the bottom of the esrog, right? Mm-hmm. The stem is the bottom of the esrog, which is actually how the esrog is connected to the tree. If the stem is removed, or nikav v'loy chaser kol shehu, or it has a hole, but it's not missing any amount, kosher. In all these cases, the lulav is kosher. Okay, so again, if this chazazis is only develops again in one spot on the minority of the area of the esrog, if the stem was removed, if it has a hole and it's not missing anything, it's kosher. On this last case of where it has a hole and it's not missing anything, the case is where, let's say, the skin was pushed in. There's no hole. It was pushed in. Okay?
Bruised, maybe.
Whatever you want to call it. Pushed in, and there's nothing missing. So the Mishna is saying, in that case, it's kosher. But that is only if the hole is not wider than a coin called an isser, which they say is about 1.2 inches. Okay?
That's a big hole.
It's a big hole. If it was wider than an isser, it disqualifies the esrog even if nothing is missing. And the hole is not even, and I'm sorry, if it is wider than an isser, it disqualifies the esrog even if nothing is missing. The skin was merely pushed in, and the hole does not go all the way through. So it didn't go all the way through. It's not missing anything. But if this indentation, right, is wider than an isser, then it disqualifies it. When the Mishnah talks about the hole that's not missing, it's talking about, again, it's not missing, it's not going all the way through, and it's not as wide as that coin. Last case in the Mishnah, esrog akushi puzzle. A black esrog is invalid. Why? Because it's not supposed to be black. It's supposed to be green. It's supposed to be yellow. So if for some reason where esrogim typically grow yellow, let's call it, yeah, and this one grows black, it's invalid. But in areas that, let's say, the esrogim do grow black, seems to be such a thing, the grass could grow black, then it's not a problem because that's the normal way for them to grow.
And green?
1 second. Now, let's say the esrog is green like a leek, type of vegetable, okay? Rabbi Meir machsher, Rabbi Meir says kosher. Rabbi Yehuda Pais, Rabbi Yehuda says it's invalid. Now, hold on, okay? It's invalid. The reason Rabbi Yehuda considers it invalid is because he considers such an esrog that it hasn't fully developed. It shows that its growth has been stunted. It's not fully developed. This is talking about an esrog that turns green and is going to stay green. It doesn't turn yellow. It's a esrog that stays green. And it's green like leek, which they say is green like grass. If that's how it's going to stay, that's where Rabbi Meir says it's good. Rabbi Yehuda says it's no good. That's a sign that it's not fully developed. But an esrog that is green, but it's going to turn yellow, it's just part of the stages, right? That first becomes green, grows green, and it becomes yellow.
Not right.
Then we say it's kosher, even if it's green. It's not yellow yet. A green esrog is kosher because as long as it's the type of esrog that will turn yellow, then it's kosher. And you called it not ripe, but the way they explain it here is because esrogim of this type are fully developed even at that stage. It may be that the color still is going to change, and it's a nicer color, I don't want to call it, but it's considered fully developed. So the ones that won't turn yellow, that Rabbi Yehuda invalidates because he says they're not fully developed, and they're stopping. They're not going to develop anymore. But our ones that are green before they turn yellow, they are fully developed. They just haven't fully turned the color that they finally turn into before they start going bad. And therefore, a green esrog, the ones that we have, are going to be kosher. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi. Just like banana, green.